So you want to make a replica of a Gibson PAF humbucker pickup? Forget about it. The other day I read an article on the Guitar World website which described the history of the Gibson PAF humbucker pickup and why it's so difficult to replicate those pickups today. However, the article missed one key element, and I'm going to explain that a little bit later in this video. The article did a great job of providing the history of the Gibson PAF humbucker pickup. And it also explains a lot about the composition of the materials that were used to make those pickups. The bobbins, the base plates, the adjustable screws, the slugs, even the magnet was all explained in detail. They also talked about the wire that was used to wind the coils. However, like I said, there was one key piece of information that was left out that I feel needs to be addressed. Before I continue, I'd like to remind you, you're watching this video on YouTube, and that means you can help support my channel financially by clicking the thanks button below, which will give you the opportunity to leave me a tip in the amount of your choice. You can also visit my YouTube merch store displayed below the description for this video and buy a t-shirt or a plan for making a guitar or some of the different tools and jigs we use to make guitars. At the very least, if you like this video, please be sure to click the thumbs up icon below. And if you like watching videos devoted to building guitars, click the subscribe button as well. That way you won't miss out on any future content. Now let's get back to the video. That one piece of information I feel the article missed was the fact that wire made in 1955, and really we're talking between 1955 and 1965, is very different than wire made in 2022, even though the wire may have exactly the same physical specifications. For example, Gibson used 42 gauge plain enamel wire when they made their PAF humbuckers. Sometimes it was plain enamel, sometimes it was heavy formvar. As far as the insulation is concerned. However, it's important to understand that wire that was made between 1955 and 1965 used different manufacturing techniques to make that wire than the wire that's made today. We're talking about different technologies that today require different types of machines to make the wire. There's also some different compositions of the copper that was used back in the 1950s and 1960s as opposed to what's made today. Today they are able to make wire with a much higher level of consistency than they could make back in the 1950s and 1960s. Therefore, the wire made in those days is very different than the wire that's made today. As a result, it's next to impossible to make a replica PAF humbucker today that would be 100% correct to those pickups that were made back in the 50s and 60s. You can get the bobbins made exactly the same. You can even get the slugs, the screws, the base plate, even the covers. You can get all of that made correctly, exactly the same as it was in those days. But what you can't get is that coil wire. And let's face it, the coil wire is a critical component in the performance of the pickup. So really the only way you could hope to replicate those pickups from that era is if you could by chance stumble onto a spool of wire that was made at that in those, in the 1950s and 1960s. So, and you would have to be lucky enough to find 42 gauge plain enamel or heavy formvar wire made in that period. I'm not saying that's not impossible, but it's going to be really difficult to do. And I know some pickup makers out there have actually been able to source wire that was made in that time frame, but it's highly unlikely you're going to be able to find that. Now, is it possible for a wire manufacturer to make replica wire? It might be possible, but I participated in a conversation a number of years ago between some pickup makers and a wire manufacturer, where an attempt was made to see if the wire manufacturer could make replica wire that is identical to what was made in the 50s and 60s. And as it turns out, in order to make wire to those specifications would require making a replica factory. They would have to retool a factory in order to make wire to those specifications. And obviously to do that would require a minimum amount. And if I remember correctly, that wire manufacturer required a minimum order of about 100,000 pounds of wire. So obviously trying to replicate that wire today is impractical. So obviously you're going to either have to source that wire made from in the 1950s and 1960s, which, like I said, is going to be next to impossible, or you would have to place an enormous minimum order with a manufacturer who would agree to make replica wire for you, and that's probably not going to happen. However, you can replicate the tone. And the way you would do that is you would, first of all, you would have to identify a PAF which is going to yield a desirable tonal response. And if you read that article, you're going to notice that Gibson PAFs were all over the map in terms of how they were manufactured, because of the different types of winding machines and the methods that they used to count the turns. You would end up with PAFs that sounded really good and then PAFs that didn't sound really good. So the first thing you have to do is identify a PAF that sounds really good. Then you would have to dissect that pickup to determine the specifications, the number of turns, the capacitance, the inductance, the Gauss of the magnets, all that stuff would have to be recorded. Then you would have to try to replicate that by winding pickups. And you would probably have to burn through a lot of wire in order to nail those specifications exactly. But there's a good chance that once you did, you would have a pretty good sounding, almost 95% accurate PAF replica pickup. And there are guys out there who've actually done this. There are a number of companies, in fact, I think some of them are mentioned in that article, who have actually gone to those lengths to replicate that sound. So as long as you're willing to do that, once you've achieved the holy grail of pickup tone in that humbucker replica, you would be able to reproduce that over and over and over. So I hope you found this video to be useful, to be interesting and enlightening, and I would encourage you to go read that article. And, you know, as I've said before, click the thumbs up button, and, you know, there are different ways that you can help support this channel, and I would encourage you to consider doing that. But the least you can do is, if you like the videos on building guitars or, you know, maybe repairing guitars, click the subscribe button so that you won't miss out any future content on this subject. So until the next episode, take care, stay safe, and I'll see you soon.